Okay, we've got Shawn, Siegel, and Marcy Terry on. I don't normally have lay people. I'm lay myself. I have medical doctors, brain surgeons, epidemiologists, virologists, scientists, the head of the EU virus program, Dr. Wolfgang Wodarg, all of them. I have them on. They say what this guy says. But I listen to him. I hear him all the time on the weekend. He's on local 90.1 here in Austin. And I hear him, and they know what they're talking about, vaxtruth.org. So this is a short segment, long segment coming up. But tell us about vaxtruth.org, Shawn, Siegel. And tell us about, also the lady that we're going to have on with you, Marcy Terry, who's on via video Skype. People can see her in just a moment. What woke you up? Because you're just very articulate. You know what you're talking about. And, just the way you calmly talk about things really touches me. There's a poignance to your voice. You're not trying to do it, but it just always moves my intellect and my heart when you're just saying, this is happening to our children. I mean, tell people why you got involved.
Okay, and sure appreciate the opportunity, Alex. I'm a grandfather here in Austin, Texas, and I was 64 years old 4 years ago when I first found out that a vaccine could literally kill or debilitate a child for life. That kind of blew me away. About the same time, I found myself in a kind of a closed little seminar with Dr. Sherry Tenpenny. And she informed me, and the rest of us, about 8 or 9 of us there in the group, that the CDC changed the definition of polio the year the vaccine was introduced. That did not sit well with me at all, because that's trickery. That's a magic trick. That's not disease eradication. That's disease elimination through the stroke of a pen. And that started me researching, especially having my 3 kids in town. I now have 4 grandkids.
That's right. When Bill Gates damages 40-something thousand kids and 60,000 in India, they don't call it polio. They call it paralysis. Explain what they did to claim the polio vaccine worked.
I'll explain the whole thing. What they did was they changed the definition of paralytic polio. And there's 2 components. This is critical. They changed the definition of paralytic polio from a presence of slight paralysis or partial paralysis over 24 hours to paralysis over 60 days. What most folks don't know is that even paralytic polio self-recovered in 2 to 3 weeks. So that knocked out upwards of 2/3 of the cases that would thenceforth be labeled polio. Now, the other component, second component, there are actually 3 in total. Second component is critical and unbelievable, and it demonstrates the hubris you always mention on the air just perfectly. Non-paralytic polio, it made up 55%. I looked up the cases in the years preceding the introduction of the polio vaccine, 52, 53, 54, and it made up 55% of the cases reported as polio, non-paralytic polio. Non-paralytic polio is like a bad cold.
And we're showing graphs from the CDC on screen for viewers.
Yeah. And non-paralytic polio is akin to a mild cold. They don't come and tell you that. They never tell you that paralytic polio, upwards of 2/3 of those cases, would self-recover within 2 to 3 weeks.
But then it gets worse. I'm not just going off what you say. This is well known for vaccine research. This is like, the fact that, the Rock of Gibraltar is out in the ocean. If you look at this, there was this little goodie in the polio vaccine that hundreds of millions of Americans and hundreds of millions of foreigners got that had something that killed people deader than a hammer in it, SV40 cancer virus.
Right. SV40 was detected in 1960.
It was on purpose. But go ahead.
In 1960, and the most egregious thing there was, even after it was detected, they never even pulled the batches in which they knew the SV40 was present.
And we have the clip of one of the inventors of it laughing and saying, well, there are too many people, and laughing. And he laughs with PBS. It's very funny.
Well, this is, the statistics.
Most people folks, that died of cancer and all these rare cancers that became suddenly super common, you can thank the government. They murdered your family. Hope you enjoy it. Go ahead.
Okay, these statistics are one thing, and Marcy Terry will speak to those. She's an excellent researcher. I go with the issue of trust, because that's what struck me that day with Sherry Tenpenny. That's what started me on my original research journey. The point is, between the changes made to paralytic polio and non-paralytic polio, and what they do with non-paralytic is they literally changed the definition of non-paralytic polio.
Stay there. We'll expose the giant hoax, and we'll have your co-host Marcy Terry on with us right after this quick break. I'm Alex Jones. Shawn Siegel, grandfather, began researching vaccines, talk show host. Marcy Terry is co-host. We haven't introduced Marcy yet, and I haven't really gotten much into you guys' bio, but keep rolling with the statistics and then introduce Marcy, and you guys kind of have the floor here for a little while.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I was at non-paralytic polio. They did the most amazing magical trick and pulled the incredible rabbit out of the hat. We are told that meningitis is one disease. Now, there are two. There's aseptic and viral. So you have a bacterial version and a viral version. And we were also told that polio is a disease that is caused by the polio virus. Ostensibly, you should be able to look into a microscope and tell somebody exactly what it is they have. What they did was they completely relabeled between 1955 and 56 and 65, about a decade, they relabeled all cases of non-paralytic polio as aseptic meningitis. And this comes from Canada, where they had the exact same move. And I wouldn't doubt that the lady who allowed this in their publication got fired for doing so. But I'll read it. It says, it may be noted, this is from 1959, by the way. It's called Poliomyelitis Trends, 1958. It may be noted that the Dominion Council of Health at its 74th meeting in October of 58 recommended that for the purposes of national reporting and statistics, the term non-paralytic poliomyelitis be replaced by meningitis, viral, or aseptic. This is phenomenal. They erased a diagnosis from the medical dictionary. And when they did that, they erased 55% of the cases of polio that had been reported on an annual basis before the vaccine was introduced. Between the changes to the paralytic polio and the non-paralytic polio, it left about 10% of the cases. So strokes of the pen eliminated 90%, and then the coup de grace, the CDC mandated that thenceforth all cases of suspected polio go to them, to the CDC, for final analysis. Just
like vaccine damage that they cover up.
It's damage control. In this case, the damage, as far as they're concerned, is any diagnosis of actual polio. And that's what happened. And, you know, we have a very firm...
Yeah, what do they call it now? Guillain-Barré?
Guillain-Barré, Bell's palsy, acute flaccid paralysis.
Which they talk about record neurological disorders.
Right. It never disappeared. You know, what happened to polio? Nothing happened to polio. The symptoms are still there. There are hundreds, probably thousands of people in the country, as you just said, that are now diagnosed with Guillain-Barré or Bell's palsy or acute flaccid paralysis, who before the vaccine was introduced.
But it's also another fraud. I think what's happening is his mic's up too high because he's not up on it, and then I'm over here. That's just a little thing we notice. Anyways, getting back to what I was breaking down here, and we're going to introduce your co-host. It's very, very important to understand that there's so many frauds that'll make your head spin. So we're just hitting some of the highlights here. But it's the same in Australia, Europe here. I've seen all the graphs, mainline government graphs. I've heard you talk about it. Maybe I'm having that big stack and the graphics we're showing for TV viewers, but for radio listeners, it was the advent of sewage treatment. It was the advent of lights. It was the advent of better food. And you see all sorts of diseases go way down. Then vaccines become popularized, 40s, 50s, and actual diseases bump up some, but not to the previous level before hygiene.
Right.
I mean, people used to dump their crap in the streets.
Exactly. And it was all those improvements in public health and personal hygiene, refrigeration of food, less toxicity in your diet, that lowered by 95% the disease mortality rates from about 1915, where they peaked, to in the 40s. So by the time the 50s came along, those childhood diseases that are caricatured now as plagues were not considered plagues at all. They were just childhood diseases.
Well, they also don't make a big deal out of all the people they're killing with the vaccines now. Let's bring Marcy Terry, and I know you've been chomping at the bit, Marcy, joining us via video Skype. Marcy, how did you get into this? And like, go over some of the statistics for people. I mean, you guys kind of talk here.
Well, hi, Alex. Thanks for having us. Going over some of the statistics. Well, let me just start with how I got into this. I'm a mother, and I'm also a grandmother. I live in Indiana, and I have a daughter who was vaccine injured and who had a very serious vaccine injury and almost died a few years back. And a couple of years ago, just before school started here, there was an article in the paper that was written in the Evansville Courier and Press, and on the front page of the paper, it declared the title was "Sticking to the Schedule," and if you don't, it was this, what's published in mainstream news all over the place at the beginning of the school years. If your child is not up to date on their vaccines, they can't go to school. And
they lie and hoax and say it's the law when it's not.
Exactly, and so I tried to be nice, and I tried to play and be a good girl, and I called and I said, can you please just do a follow-up story, because people need to know that they do have rights. They have the right to religious exemption in the state of Indiana, and they also have the right to medical exemption. So if their child has a medical reason not to get a vaccine, then they don't have to get them. And they just flat out refused. They weren't going to run.
And again, every year before school, every paper in the country that I see runs hoax article after hoax article, sometimes 3 in the same issue, saying it's the law, you'll be arrested. And I read some this year before the school year out of like a Dallas paper and stuff saying there's never been a problem. It's a conspiracy theory. There are no side effects. And the insert says can kill you. And I showed the inserts. I mean, it's criminal lying. They need to be sued.
Well, exactly. It is criminal lying, and I think they do need to be sued. And I think, if we started holding the news stations, and
these are people that want to make sure they kill your kid. And they kill people with the papilloma shot all the time. I mean, they just love it. They're just murdering us. In Nazi Germany or Russia, they put you in a pit and shot you. Now they just shoot you up and laugh about it.
Yes. Yeah. And
what happened to your daughter? What'd she take? My uncle almost died from a tetanus shot back in the 60s. He doesn't have to be told not to take it. My mom got super sick from a flu shot. She didn't have to be told. What are they going to do as the armies of people with dead kids or kids that have convulsions or get neurological? I mean, that's their problem. As the army of the people they've damaged or killed grows, what are they going to do?
Well, that's exactly it, and that's the reason why that's the reason why we're here today, and that's the reason why Vax Truth became an entity at all. Because all I started out to do was I just wanted to let people in my area know that it wasn't true, because I could see these people scrambling to go get vaccines, get their kids up to date on vaccines, and the Tdap, or the diphtheria, tetanus, and acellular pertussis, or vaccine. It's DTaP for young kids, and then it's Tdap for older kids. That was added to the schedule here in Indiana a few years ago, and that's the one that almost killed my daughter. She had a grand mal seizure 3 hours after she got it, and that's the only vaccine she got that day.
Now, how old was she when that happened?
She was 15.
Now, see, that probably made them mad. If she'd have been 6 months when they usually had it, they'd have done a scan or blood on the brain. They could have the fun of not just killing her, because that usually that happens. The infant death syndrome. They could have thrown you in jail and had a double goody. So I guess that was kind of upsetting that she survived and is doing better, and that they couldn't throw you in jail. Because she was 15 and could say, "Mommy didn't beat me."
Right. Well, that's true. And the other thing is that as they're adding these vaccines to the schedule for older children and adolescents, it's different from when you have a vaccine injury in a young child, because they're not talking yet. They don't have school records. They don't have they're not athletes. They don't have this history that they carry with them already that shows that they were neurologically intact. They were developing.
Yeah, that's why they want to hurt them as young as possible. Yeah, they found it's hard to cover it up when
Yeah,
plus, they can't frame you. I mean, that's the real problem for the police and everybody, is they want to throw you in jail. Because that's an extra fun part.
Well, I'm sorry, but they're not going to. Well, I'm not going to dare them. But
let's talk about SIDS, because now they're having to admit it's the vaccines, and it really is getting to them now that they can't throw all those parents in jail after they kill their kids.
Well, there's still a lot of them sitting in jail right now. SIDS and shaken baby syndrome that. These all of a sudden, these wonderful parents who never had any kind of indication that they were abusive to their children. They have older children that have never been abused, and all of a sudden they have a child that dies within 3 days of having vaccines. And generally, it's after the pertussis vaccine.
The doctors know that full well. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, they know it.
It's fun.
But there's too much money involved. Hmm? There's too much money.
Yeah, this is interesting. One of the guests we had on the show was Dr. Vera Scheibner from Australia. And 20 years ago, she with her husband developed a computerized monitor.
That's why I got you on. Here's what's going to happen. You've got the floor, and if you guys can do it, I'm going to give you the 4th hour, which is a large audience, probably 1 million people. It's 3 million regularly in an hour, because I'm doing this now with really cool people, just giving them the 4th hour, kind of the overdrive. I'm going to give you guys the floor to really drill into that. Can you guys do the next hour?
Absolutely.
Okay, but like
2 of us.
Absolutely. Give people a little foreview. Yeah, because I heard the doctor. I heard you cover it. In fact, that's why I had him call you also. I want to get her on because they knew what was happening. Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, it is excellent. She and her husband developed a what they call the cot watch study, because in Australia it's called a cot death instead of SIDS. Right?
And they wanted to find out why it was happening, and they found out.
And parents wanted to find out what was happening, so they hired Dr. Scheibner and her husband to run this monitor from birth, right? And it was a perfect control situation, as Dr. Scheibner described, where for the first 2 months, with all these little babies, there was no break in the breathing pattern that was detected by the machine. But 7 hours after the first vaccination, and it was a pattern. 7 hours after the first vaccination, and again about 24 hours later, again a week or 10 days later, again 5 days after that, there was a pattern. The kids experienced a 95% loss of intake of air. I mean, how critical can you get? 95%.
Well, it's designed chemical warfare. It's like the UN got caught adding the hormone to the tetanus shot. These are all tailor-made.
Well, and you can see why a baby that is 95% compromised, laying face down on any surface, on a mattress, is in terrible trouble, is in potentially... And
you inject them with a chemical weapon, and it's causing brainstem neurological motor controls. Break down what they found.
And what they found was, and Dr. Scheibner did her homework, she went to the Australian government, got the statistics, which they had by day, and found out that the SIDS incidence matched eerily with the incidence of these 95%.
Well, of course, and see, now they're saying abort kids up to 3. Have you heard that? That's the Journal of Pediatrics says it's a great idea. No, that was Journal of Bioethics last year. And so, and euthanasia death panels, those are tests to see, can we kill kids and cover it up and blame them? This is all a bioweapon attack.
Right.
Very loving.
It certainly feels like that. But we approach it from trust. I trust that the parents out there who are listening to our show, and by the way, the name of the show is The Vaccine Myth, An Issue of Trust, and we are on LogosRadioNetwork.com every Sunday from 2 to 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time at this point, Central Time, except we started doing, I think that's the show you heard last time you listened, was on the first Sunday of every month. We now have the Mythopalooza, which is a 4-hour show.
Yeah, well, what you need is people to go and record your show, get it off the archive, and put it on YouTube. We need people, more importantly than nowadays and the way media works, it's not even saying when your show is on, though that's important, is for the activist to push it out to people.
We have it. We have a Vaccine Myth.
No, it's very, very exciting.
We have a YouTube channel. It's HTTPS, the secure, S for secure, //www.youtube.com/user/the vaccine myth.
Sure, nobody can write that down. I'm telling you, just say Vax Truth on YouTube.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No. I'm just trying to. Everybody always tries to give out the whole URL. Nobody can.
I appreciate that. Yes, indeed. Go to the Vaccine Myth, and we have had Dr. Andy Wakefield. We've had Dr. Sherry Tenpenny several times. One of her good friends, a nephrologist, who, after being quite dismayed after finding out what her kidney patients were suffering after vaccines in the hospital, ended up becoming a homeopath. She now is still...
Well, I like what you guys are doing because it shows you're fighting back. Marcy, what do you want to say while we're here talking to me? You're going to have the whole next hour here to talk about, these studies and the big stack of stuff you've got. But, what else do you want to impart to people out there? I think this is a giant hoax. Can you trust them if they say it's the law to take it when it's not? And then they're now moving to make it the law.
Well... Exactly, and what's happening, Alex, is, as you said, that the army of parents who have vaccine-injured children is growing, and it's growing exponentially, and it's growing along. If you just look at the correlation between as the childhood schedule goes up, the number of children who are injured goes up, and the number of parents and family members who watch what happens is also going up. So as those parents, parents Parents talk to their friends. Parents talk to other parents. Doctors aren't listening to us. The public health entities aren't listening to us. The government certainly isn't listening to us. So we have, we're talking to each other.
And when they kill your kid, they're going to also throw you in a dungeon. So even if you're not going to listen to us now, when your child has the convulsion, quits breathing, and dies, and the cops are putting you in handcuffs, demand the autopsy and the autoimmune response, blood on the brain. Okay, bring that up because, they've already had the victory of killing your kid. You didn't listen to us or brain damaging them. You're going to need to stay out of prison or they're going to try to take your other kids.
Well, Marcy,
that's happening now. That is happening now, Alex, as well. And this is a continuum. It starts on actually before the birth of the child with the administration of the flu vaccine during pregnancy, and then hepatitis B vaccine on the first day of life, and then the first 2 years, children are injected with 115 different virus antigens.
Let's talk about that because until 4 years ago, every doctor worldwide, you don't give a pregnant woman shots. They knew it caused miscarriages and brain damage. Now they say, oh, they need extra. In fact, they're now saying 2 flu shots, and then it's like, and then now the doctors are being told it's normal to have a convulsion now. Right. See, the blood's running out your nose. That's part of the change coming.
It'll be okay. Take some Tylenol. It'll be all right.
It's part of the change. It's glorious. So yes, we're going to go to break and come back and get into that in the next hour here with our guest, Shawn Siegel. And, of course, Marcy Terry, just very articulate people I probably listened to 10, 15 times. And everything they talk about is just dead on, hardcore, the truth. They really get it. And, I get really nasty about this. I mean, let me tell you something. I know people who've had their kids brain damage and had the cops come and say, you must have beaten your kid and stuff. You must have. And this was in more recent times. So then the vaccine issue's known. So the hospital may go, well, it might have been a reaction, but they have a secret payout fund where they pay it out. By secret, it's never on the news, the vaccine damage fund. They know. And the heads of hospitals knows. I mean, I had nurses, last child I had, she's 5 now, pressure us to take shots, and at the end of it, they go, oh, yeah, we're listeners, our kids don't take them. I mean, they all know. They're told to do this. And so now they want to they have a Texas bill to get into the bills to make everybody take shots, all of it. You guys are going to have the floor. But you were getting into something really powerful, Marcy, as we went to break. Do you remember what that was? Because I've talked so much, I forget. What was that last point you were trying to get into when we went to break? Well, what I was saying is that it's really a continuum, and what's happening is that those children who emerge from the first 2 years, in which they get the 115 vaccine antigens, not to talk about the toxins that are in the vaccines. Oh, you look at them; they're zombies. The kids are zombies now. And then they get to kindergarten and they survive another onslaught. But a lot of them are really vaccine damaged. They're vaccine injured. We have a whole continuum of neurological and immune system disorders. And these kids have gastrointestinal problems. They have all kinds of physical problems. They have circulatory problems. They have digestive issues. They have excretory problems. If they can't get you in the criminal system, the judiciary, they're getting you in the medical system. Well, they get you out. If your kid is so sick that they can't go to school, then they get you out of the job market. So you're at home 24/7. Then you've got foreign globalists took over and are engaged in soft kill operations. And John P. Holden wrote about it in the White House book, Ecoscience. You guys are going to have the floor in the next hour. I want you to go back through all of this in more detail. You'll have the floor. But Mr. Siegel, I mean, this is painful for us. I mean, don't people realize this isn't a game if you're a new listener?
It is very, very painful. I'll just point out one particular instance. A fellow we had on the air. He's present every time because his music fills the air as we come on the second hour. The song he sings, the group is called the Refusers, by the way, and the song Mr. Belkin sings is of the death of his 5-week-old daughter. Good God. What happened was, at that point, 1998, there was no mandated day of birth Hep B vaccine. So his daughter, Lila Rose, was healthy, beautiful, vibrant little girl at 5 weeks, got a Hep B vaccine, and 15 hours later was dead. And 2 days later, the coroner office called the house and told them they had found brain damage. Brain damage is expected as a vaccine injury. It's on the insert. The Merck manual lists vaccines, but they won't do it. Cause of encephalitis. Well, talk about injury to insult, and this insult to injury. 2 days later, Mr. Belkin found himself in front of the very same woman who had told him that on the phone, being told by her while being monitored by her supervisor that they had changed their minds. They were going to list it as a SIDS death, which they did. And subsequently, in the years since, there has been no sign anywhere of the brain damage. They erased it from the books. And that's the part that everybody has to realize is the insidious part.
The criminal cover-up. They know.
It came down.
They know. They love it.
Came down from the supervisor.
Good God.
Monitored the conversation.
Stay there. You're going to be back in 1 minute.
Okay. I would like you to continue. We never got really into the story of Vax Truth and the billboards that were the result of parents, indeed, who were in greater and greater numbers experiencing damage to their children by vaccines, which led you to your billboard campaign. Now, would you get into that?
Yes. Well, what I was saying is in August of 2011, so about a little bit more than a year and a half ago, they were gearing up for the beginning of the school year, as they do every year, and the newspaper ran an article on the front page that was entitled "Sticking to the Shots," or no, "Sticking to the Schedule." I'm sorry. And what it stated was what newspapers across the country and major news outlets, television outlets, and that kind of thing say. Every year, your child cannot go to school if they are not fully vaccinated according to the CDC schedule, period. That's not true. In 48 states, parents are entitled to religious exemptions from vaccinations, and in about 20 to 25 states, I'm not exactly sure how many it is at this moment, there are also philosophical exemptions.
Right.
The only two states in the United States that do not provide for religious exemptions are Mississippi and West Virginia. So living in Indiana, I know that we have religious exemptions from vaccines, and both my daughters have religious exemptions. I was slow to wake up. My daughter almost died as a result of my slow learning curve.
And that's a great sign we're looking at right now. No shots, no school, not true.
Well, what happened was I tried to get the newspaper to print a retraction or to at least do a follow-up story, letting parents know that they don't have to race out and get their kids vaccinated, in such a rush because they have to go to school. I mean, parents, there are a lot of single-parent families. There are a lot of families who are, they don't have the option to stay home and homeschool. They have to work, and their kids have to go to school. And so when the newspaper puts something out that says, your kids can't go to school unless they're fully vaccinated, parents go in droves to the health department and they get their kids vaccinated and then don't look into it. They're not making informed decisions. And putting it out there like that is coercion. It's like holding a gun to your head and saying you have to vaccinate or else, and that's just not right. So
it's a misrepresentation of the law.
It's a misrepresentation of the law
by the very people whom your tax dollars are supporting, which should be criminal in itself. They're giving you half the law. They're not telling you that what they first say actually is countered by the rest of the law. They don't tell you about the religious exemption, and indeed in 20 or 25 of the states, including Texas, the philosophical exemption as well. And right. It's insidious that parents, because indeed some of the billboards up here, you've seen the one that says no shots, no school, not true. Vaccines can damage. I put that up here in Austin last year, and it was covered by KI News that night. It was very well covered. But right. What in the world are we doing? What are we doing where parents have to do the job of the government? Okay, well, it's shameful, is what it is, and it's the story of the trust. That's why we call the show "The Vaccine Myth" an issue of trust. You cannot trust the CDC. You cannot trust all those powers that be that are giving you the misinformation, disinformation, and suppressing a lot of information. This is Infowars.com. We'll be back after a short break. Okay, welcome back to the Overdrive Hour on Infowars.com. I am Shawn Siegel. I'm the host of The Vaccine Myth and Issue of Trust. It's a weekly radio internet show, and you can access our archives by going to YouTube and looking up The Vaccine Myth channel. And you'll see all of our individual audio interviews, such as with Dr. Andrew Wakefield, with Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, many more, nutrition pharmacist, not doctor, but Ben Fuchs. All of these folks, of course, you've seen and heard on Alex's show. Marcy, you were talking about the billboards, and how many billboards now have there been around the country?
Well, I was counting the other day. I think we have 12 or 13 billboards that we have put up. We've got another one going up that will go up this month in Logansport, Indiana. We've had, it started out in Evansville. We had 2 billboards in Evansville that ran for 9 days in August of 2011. And then there was the billboard in Austin that you had, that you spearheaded for us. Then there was a billboard that was in Colorado, and then with a billboard in Texas, Texas, and again in Austin. The largest market that we have covered thus far, we had 6 billboards in Los Angeles last year.
Okay, good. And they stayed up for like 5 or 6 weeks. Is that correct?
No, the ones in Los Angeles I wish we could have afforded 5 or 6 weeks. The ones in Los Angeles were for 1 week. They went up, they were for 1 week. That's a very expensive market, and we're so small. So I'm really glad and thankful that we have this opportunity to be on InfoWars, because it helps to get the word out. And our goal, as I was saying, my goal initially as a mother was just to try to educate my local market. Evansville has about 150,000 people in the metro area, and we're a tri-state, so we have a lot of rural communities and smaller communities in Kentucky and Illinois that are also dependent on our newspaper. It's the only major source of news for a lot of families, and for them to misrepresent the truth about vaccines and education in schools, children being able to go to schools, was just unacceptable to me. So my goal was, again, just to put up billboards, because they weren't going to do it. And so I asked my Facebook friends to help me. I got some amazing help from an angel named Max.
We hear you. Go ahead.
Max is a little boy. Max is a little boy, or was a little boy. He was 22 months old when he died as a result of vaccine injuries. And thanks to Max and his father, I was able to raise enough money in 24 hours to put up the billboards in Evansville, which, interestingly, the total fee for that was $19.84. It was $1,984.
Phenomenal coincidence.
Yeah, it was a coincidence.
But folks out there, you have to appreciate this. Marcy, and certainly I was participating. Marcy was raising money through Facebook from other parents to put up billboards around the country to give parents the information that should by any responsible public authority have been provided them without this sort of absurd participation by the parents. It's just incredible that putting in $5, $10 at a time from how many people, and once in a while getting a larger donation, be able to put up the monies here. I, for instance, funded the first one here, and I believe I was repaid by some of it, at least, from monies that were given to vaxtruth.org. And that's why vaxtruth.org started. I want to know, I'm going to go back to just one issue of trust. And indeed, the vaccine myth and issue of trust is dedicated to issues of trust. That is, we do expect, as parents, as grandparents, we demand that our public health authorities, that our school systems, that our doctors, that the CDC, that the AEP, that the folks at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia be honest with us and give all the information that is due a parent under the precept of informed consent.
Exactly. Informed consent is a huge issue, and I'd like to touch on that just for a minute.
Please do.
We were talking about, as Alex was talking about, vaccine injuries, and I mentioned that my daughter, the thing that precipitated this for me was my daughter's vaccine injury. It was very significant. It happened within the last vaccine injury for her was within 3 hours of receiving a Tdap vaccine, and she had a grand mal seizure. She fell off the bed and hit her head. She stopped breathing while I held her head in my hands. Thankfully, she was resuscitated, and we went to the hospital in an ambulance. And while we were in the ambulance, I called our family doctor who had given her the vaccine, and I called his office and I said, I want this reported to VAERS, vaccine adverse events reporting system as a vaccine injury. We went to the hospital. They knew it was a vaccine injury. I told them what had happened. It was months later that I realized that it had not been reported. When I called my doctor's office, I said, why didn't you report this? And they said, well, you didn't bring her back here. They said, we didn't have to report it because you didn't bring her back here. I said, I didn't bring her back there because she stopped breathing. We went to the hospital in an ambulance. And so they said, well, it was the hospital that should have reported it. So I called the hospital and I said, well, why didn't you report it? And they said, well, we didn't administer the vaccine. The administering physician should have reported it.
So the hot potato showed up. Exactly.
So I called VAERS. I called the Health and Human Services and the VAERS office. And I asked the woman who answered the phone, I said, so whose responsibility is it to report vaccine injuries? And she said, well, either one. And I told her the situation. She said, either one should have reported. And I said, well, isn't that mandatory according to the law? And she said, yes. And I said, so what are the consequences when physicians fail to report? And she said, well, there are no consequences. I said, that's not a law. If there are no consequences, that's a suggestion. That's not a law.
Absolutely.
So and for this reason, because it's not enforced and there are no consequences, the number of vaccine injuries, the percentage is somewhere estimated to be between 1 and 10%, and it's probably between 1 and 2% of vaccine injuries that are reported. So when you're talking about informed consent for vaccination requires that you have the information that you need in order to make an accurate risk-benefit analysis.
Right. And for your own child.
If we don't have the information about how common vaccine injuries are, because there are no consequences for physicians who fail to report them, even in situations where the vaccine clearly is the cause of the injury, as in it happened within hours or minutes. There are times when a child gets a vaccination and falls dead in the doctor's office, and the doctors don't report it as a vaccine injury. Well, that's just a coincidence.
Yeah,
and the kid would have died anyway.
It should be indictable.
It should be indictable, and until that law is enforced, we don't have the information we need to make accurate risk-benefit analyses. If we can't make accurate risk-benefit analyses, then we don't have informed consent, which means we are being coerced, we are being lied to, and we are making decisions that are uninformed. As parents, we're making decisions that are uninformed because through no fault of our own, and we're simultaneously being told, you have to do this or your kid can't go to school. And in some cases, we're being told, parents are being threatened by physicians, by pediatricians. They go to the pediatrician's office and the pediatrician says, if you don't comply, I'm going to call CPS. Those threats are happening every day. And in some cases, they're following through on those threats. Parents are scared. They're scared to the point where they're not even taking their kids to the doctor because doctors are threatening them with taking their kids away. And this is happening not only with vaccines at the one end of the spectrum. What I was trying to say is we've got kids whose parents already have vaccine injured children, and they've learned their lesson and they've done their research, and so now they have new children and they're trying to find doctors to cover their care, just their basic care, and they can't take them to pediatricians because pediatricians are firing them from practice, so they're leaving them without care, and that's against the AAP's own statement, their own policy, but it's happening all the time. So parents are left trying to find doctors. Now they've got kids who are vaccine injured and have serious medical problems, and their children are not being treated for those medical problems. These children who have autism diagnoses and who have gastrointestinal problems and who have immune system problems and who have all of these systemic train wreck issues, their parents are scared to take them to the doctors because doctors are turning these parents in to CPS because they're refusing treatment. This is what's happening right now in Chicago with a young man named Alex Sportolakis, whose mother has been trying for almost 4 weeks now to get him adequate treatment for his gastrointestinal problems. The doctors aren't treating his gastrointestinal problems. He's had vomiting and diarrhea, has been stuck for almost 2 weeks in the ER department without ever going to a room, chained to a bed because he's aggressive. He's 14 years old. He's nonverbal. He has autism. And his gastrointestinal problems, diarrhea and vomiting. He hasn't even been evaluated for that.
And of course he's aggressive. He has terrible, terrible physical problems. Of course he's aggressive.
He's in pain.
And he's in pain. He can't express himself. He's 14 years old. He's probably strong, and so he's presenting a problem. But the problem is that they are not dealing with what you, Marcy, and eventually we'll get into this, what you are beginning to deal with, which is the fact that all these sensory process disorders, autism, all of these neurological disorders can be treated. They are medical problems. They are not genetic problems. They are medical problems.
It's not mental, it's physical.
It's not mental, it's physical. I'll go to one of the issues of trust we had on the vaccine myth and issue of trust. When we had Dr. Wakefield on, I was quick to bring him into the arena that he loves, because what folks don't realize is there's all the hullabaloo about the supposed ethical charges against Dr. Wakefield. His license was removed. Indeed, it was. But what no one tells you, when we'll be back in just a few seconds, there will be a break soon. And when we come back, I'll tell you what it is that no one told you that should have been trumpeted internationally on headlines everywhere, because that's the news that came out of that experiment that should have been told and wasn't. Before I go back to the Dr. Wakefield issue I was going to cover, let me talk one moment about VAERS, that Marcy spoke to just a few minutes ago. Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System was set up with the legislation in, I believe it was 1974, that took the liability for vaccine damage out of the hands of the vaccine manufacturers. It ostensibly is a recording mechanism that is essential, otherwise they wouldn't have set it up. It's supposed to record and monitor all of those longer-term reactions, the adverse reactions to vaccines. At the moment, there are over 5,000 reported suspected vaccine-associated deaths in the VAERS system. There are something like 7,000 permanent injuries. There are close to 10,000 hospitalizations, and in the tens of thousands of prolonged hospitalizations and trips to the emergency room. Doctors will tell you, and public health officials will tell you, that in regards to those VAERS reports, that correlation doesn't equal causation. Well, strictly speaking, that is true. But ethically speaking, it is not. A correlation, as we all know, both by common sense and by the definition of correlation, is a relationship not expected to exist on the basis of chance alone. It's not expected, statistically speaking, to be a coincidence. When you put on top of that the fact that, as Marcia said before, and the Journal of the American Medical Association printed years ago in one of their articles, it was the conclusion of a study that was 1% of actual serious adverse vaccine reactions ever get reported. So what's the possibility that how many deaths actually have occurred from vaccines? 5,000 are listed as suspected. And you have to assume, if you're going to make an assumption at all, because of the nature of correlation, you have to assume, unless you have proof to the contrary, in every particular instance, that every one of those is indeed causally related to the vaccines.
Shawn, I'd like to just say, too, that when you're talking about deaths from vaccines, the hepatitis B vaccine alone, the hepatitis B vaccine, which is a vaccination for hepatitis B is a sexually transmitted disease. It's transmitted the same way as other sexually transmitted diseases that are bloodborne illnesses. It's through sex and through sharing of needles. There is absolutely no rationale for giving hepatitis B vaccine to infants, particularly if their mothers are not positive for hepatitis B.
Right, which is by far most
women are screened. You know, they know if the mother's positive or not. But the hepatitis B vaccine alone, VAERS, the last time I looked, and it's been a while, I think it was December the last time I looked at it, but there were more than 800 deaths in infants under the age of 3. And most of those, 90-something% of those, were in infants under the age of 6 months. And those are deaths that have been reported from the hepatitis B vaccine. The other thing I want to say about that is, there was, and I haven't been able to find this article again, but I remember it's been a while back, but there was an article that was written by a former emergency room physician, and he was a practicing physician, I think, for about 20 years. And he wrote this article that stated that during the time when he was an emergency room physician, he never once made a report to VAERS for vaccine injury. After leaving the emergency room and learning about vaccine injuries, and I'm not sure how he learned about them, because doctors aren't taught what vaccine injury looks like. They're not taught to look for it. They're not taught to report it. None of that. So I'm not sure if it was a personal experience or what it was. But after he left the emergency room and learned what vaccine injuries really looked like, in his article he stated that looking back in hindsight, he could have made at least 1 or 2 reports per week to VAERS.
That's incredible. I mean, you can't even begin to add up. And that's only one person working in one particular room, and there are hundreds, thousands of those nationwide. We have, Marcy, one long and one short segment left here. So let's get into the positive side. In these last few weeks, the last month or so, on the vaccine myth and issue of trust, we've been trying to go into positive issues of trust as opposed to all those others that are unfortunately so readily available to grab, which is the issues of trust where the CDC and all those other public authorities are misinforming us or disinforming us or almost always suppressing, just simply not informing us and giving us the information that we as parents and grandparents demand from our public health authorities. But back to Dr. Wakefield. When Dr. Wakefield and the crew, he worked with 12 other people at the Royal Free Hospital in London. They examined 12 kids, all of whom were autistic and had severe gastrointestinal problems. They found inflamed bowel disease. They actually found the measles virus inhabiting the guts of these kids. What's not told is that when they were treated for the inflammation, the symptoms of autism were ameliorated. Yep. And in some cases, almost miraculously, kids who hadn't spoken for months or a year or more began speaking. And to me, the most heartening thing about it, and just amazing, is that from all accounts, these kids, if they were, say, 4 years old or 5 years old, and they had stopped speaking when they were 3, when they began speaking, began using the words at the level of a 4 or 5 year old.
Right.
The kids were growing internally. The kids were intellectually developing, while to the outside world they had disappeared. And Marcy, you need to take the floor, ma'am, because you are now studying to be a biomedical consultant, and I'd like for you to tell the folks exactly all the good news about how autism and other neurological disorders can be treated.
Okay. Well, I actually am. I have been a biomedical consultant since 2007.
I should correct you.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I've been a biomedical consultant since 2007. I was allowed to. I applied to take the clinical training through Defeat Autism Now, which is a branch of the Autism Research Institute in San Diego, which was started by the wonderful, amazing Bernie Rimland. I applied to take the clinical training because I live in an area of the country where there really there was no access to Defeat Autism Now doctors or those who were practicing the biomedical approach to autism and the treatment of autism. And I was allowed to attend. I had to submit letters of recommendation and that kind of thing. So prior to that, I was already doing biomedical interventions. Before I ever knew that biomedical interventions existed or what they were called, I was researching and learning about orthomolecular medicine and orthomolecular psychiatry, and I was in a private practice, a psychiatry private practice, very comprehensive, very holistic practice, a wellness center, treated with fish oil and with probiotics and with digestive enzymes. And we did functional medicine labs and looked at nutritional deficiencies and gastrointestinal problems. We looked at food allergies. We ordered food allergy profiles for our patients. We looked at we did comprehensive digestive stool analyses, all of those things before I ever went to the DAN training. So I had a really good baseline in that and saw amazing results when those issues were addressed. After I attended the training, that's when I went out on my own and became a biomedical consultant, and was working. What I would do is I would meet with parents and their children. I have a 20-page developmental history form that I ask people to fill out, and then would work with their family physicians. I would make recommendations based on the family history, based on the child's individual medical history, based on the parent report of the child's development, and taking all of those things, and most important, spending an average of about 3 hours with the parent, with the child, listening and learning from what the parent had to say about their child. Right. Because the parent is the expert of about the child. No doctor who walks into an exam room with a patient, with a parent, with a child who has serious, complex, system-wide problems, no doctor is going to understand in 3 minutes or less what's going on with that kid.
Right. The expert is the parent.
Exactly. You have to listen, and if you can't put your own ego and your own, if you walk into an exam room and you think you know what's going on, then you know what's going to come of that. That's ridiculous. So at any rate, what I would do is I work with families and with their physicians, which is not always easy because it's difficult to find physicians that are willing to listen, willing to think outside the box, and willing to work with someone who is not a licensed physician. So that can be a challenge in itself, but it's not an insurmountable challenge. And children get better. They get better, and they get amazingly better. And it's like it's kind of like when you get a tune-up for your car. You can put gas in your car, but if there's no oil in it, it's not going to run right. If there's no fluid in it, it's not going to run right. You have to assess all of those things in order for it to run. And that's kind of a very simplified way of looking at what biomedical is. And so it is very exciting. It's also very frustrating because the mainstream medical model is the norm. Children's needs are being ignored because they have an autism diagnosis. And when I think what's so heartbreaking for so many of us this week, as we learned about what was going on with Alex at Loyola University Medical Center in Chicago, so many of us have been through biomedical interventions with our children. It's very costly. In many cases, it doesn't necessarily have to be, and there's a lot that parents can do without a physician. There are ways to get labs ordered, and there are some really good labs that can help to decrease the stabbing in the dark kind of thing, the trial and error sort of stuff. There's some really good comprehensive labs.
What's the best way for parents who may be, or grandparents, relatives who may be listening and are getting interested in the fact that there is a positive side to this, that such neurological damage can be treated successfully, for them to locate biomedical consultation?
Well, that is becoming a problem. Actually, it's not as easy to find doctors who are willing to pursue this anymore, because the more children are injured and the more parents are refusing vaccines and the more people are looking for doctors to help their children, the more the pharmaceutical industry is striking back. There are doctors throughout the United States who've been helping these children who have been targeted. There's actually, I've not seen this, but there are rumors, and I think they're true, that there's a list. It's a hit list of doctors, and they systematically are doing the same thing to these doctors that they did to Dr. Wakefield. The goal is to take away their medical license, and to discredit them and to shut them down because it's about money. It's not about helping these kids. It's about money.
Right.
And so it is very difficult. I'm actually in a pretty good position because I don't treat children, and I just review their histories, and based on their histories and their family histories and that kind of thing, I work with physicians who are willing to work with me. What we do is we don't treat autism because there is no medical treatment for autism. That would be against the standard medical model, and you can't go against the standard medical model because that gets you in trouble. Right. So what you do is you look at what the symptoms are, and then you order the labs based on those symptoms. And then when you get the labs back that confirm the presence of these medical issues, you treat the medical issues. And when you treat the medical issues, the body heals. And when the body heals, an amazing thing happens. Nutrients start being absorbed by the gastrointestinal system. And when nutrients start being absorbed by the gastrointestinal system, then there are the building blocks in place for neurotransmitters to be formed. Because neurotransmitters are not formed in the brain. They're not, believe it or not, neurotransmitters don't start in the brain. They start in the gut. Okay. And if the gut is damaged, then the gut can't produce the building blocks for neurotransmitters, so the brain doesn't work right. So autism is not a brain disease. Autism is a body illness. Autism is the behavioral manifestations of a body, systems-wide body illness. When you treat the body, you address the illness, then the brain starts working the way it's supposed to, and the manifestations of autism, quote unquote, disappear.
And that is such wonderful news, and that's what should be broadcast and trumpeted internationally, and is through shows such as this, as Alex's show, and we certainly appreciate this opportunity from Alex to provide the message to everybody. And as with Dr. Wakefield, I have to mention too, it wasn't only the ability to speak that came back to these kids who, after being treated for their bowel inflammations, began improving, and their symptoms of autism began to disappear. They began to sleep at night when they hadn't slept for a long time. They began to recognize and bond with their parents and their siblings, whom they had not recognized or bonded with for years in some cases, where, I mean, you actually got the personal, familial recognition and bond back.
Absolutely.
Just by dealing with their gut.
Right. I want to tell you something about that. They're you're saying about bonding. They're the first child that I treated. I'll try to make this short, but the first child that I treated who had an autism diagnosis was actually referred to me for neuropsychological evaluation, which is something else I did, one of the other hats I wore. And her mother brought her to me because she's 13 years old. She was aggressive toward others in the school environment, and the school was saying she can't come here anymore. She's going to have to go to an inpatient hospital setting where she can stay for the rest of her schooling. She's 13 years old. She had an moderate autism, moderate mental retardation at that time. That's what they called it. Now it's moderate mental handicap, and with an IQ that was estimated to be in the 50s. She was nonverbal at that time. Her mother brought her to me because she wanted me to test her. The first three or four times that I met with them, the first time I had to jump back pretty quick because I almost got hit in the face with a fist. The second time I didn't get that close, but she was absolutely not going to work with me. It was, hands across the chest and no, we're not doing this. So after the third or fourth time, I just told the mom, I said, I hate to keep taking your money because I don't know that I can help you. I mean, I can't test if she's not going to participate, which is why that's why children with autism, quote unquote, get diagnosed as having mental handicaps, because the tests that are being used are very heavily weighted for language and for attention and motivation. And if they're not cooperating and they can't cooperate, they can't communicate with you, then they end up with these scores that make them look like they're mentally handicapped, and they're not. Some of these kids are absolutely brilliant, and a lot of them are. Well, what happened anyway was after the fourth time, Mom says, I'm going to keep bringing her because I think you can help her. So I said, well, let's go sit down and go over we're missing something here. Let's go over the developmental history. So we started looking at it, and I said, okay, tell me about the constipation. How bad is this? She said, well, it's pretty bad. We've been to the hospital 4 times for impactions. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay. So sometimes she goes for up to a month without having a bowel movement. The doctor says, the pediatrician says, well, some kids, that's normal. That is not normal. Having a bowel movement once a week or, once every 2 weeks or even once every 2 or 3 days is not normal. That's not normal. That's the way the body clears itself of toxins.
Right.
So
that's your immune system working. That is the everyday workings of the immune system at play.
To clear toxins.
Exactly. It's clear toxins. And eventually we'll get into that too. That it turns out that one of the more egregious acts of the vaccine industry is to slander disease. Disease is simply the extension of the everyday working of the immune system when the toxicity, which needs to be removed from the body, has grown too great for the daily mechanization to accomplish. And right. And at that point, the body takes advantage of whatever viruses or bacteria are available. It begins an infection. The infection gets rid of the toxicity, which, as one of the doctors we've spoken to on the show says, is a dirty word, basically, in medical language, because you can't be specific with it. You can't give it a drug. You can't right. charge for it. But there it is. That's what happens. It's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that every time you've been sick in your life, you got well. The question is, and you think about it, and it's a fascinating question, did you get well in spite of the disease, or did you get well because of the disease? That's where we ended up going with our issues of trust, was basically trust in Mother Nature. And what you are doing, Marcy, is fantastic, and all the other people like you who are working in this around the country and around the world, because you're learning to support Mother Nature in her support of the immune system and allow it to do its job.
If I can just finish really quick, Shawn, I want to tell you what happened with this girl.
Do it.
I sent Mom home when I talked about the constipation. I sent her home with a protocol to clear out this kid's GI tract, to clear the constipation. And we scheduled a 4-week follow-up. I told her, I said, I don't know if this is going to work. This is the first, I've done this with my kids, but this is what I want you to do. So I sent her home. 2 weeks later, the physician I was working with says, oh, I heard from Mom today. The girl who you were testing, the one that's not verbal, she's talking.
Oh.
And 2 weeks later, she came back. She met me at the bottom of the elevator as I was going out to take my little dog for a break. She met me at the elevator. She's standing there with her hands on her hips, and she looks at me. She says, I'm ready to cooperate.
All right, hang on a second. Okay, we're in the last segment. This is a short segment, Marcy. We've just got a few minutes. We'll be wrapping up here in our Overdrive Hour on the Alex Jones Show. Again, Alex's sites are Infowars.com, PrisonPlanet.com, and of course you can watch his shows live at PrisonPlanet.tv. Basically, I just want to say that there's no reason to fear disease. For those of you out there who are still vaccinating, perhaps, there's no reason to. The industry works on fear. They have morphed what used to be by the middle of the 20th century considered just rites of passage, medical rites of passage. Chickenpox, mumps, measles have been turned into the plague when they are simply, for any child that has a modicum of health, of general health and immune system health, they are no problem recovering from those diseases. And they are rites of passage. The immune system actually strengthens through use, like any system.
Exactly. It's like, what we have done as a society to our children through vaccination for things like measles and chickenpox is we are denying their immune systems the experience that the immune system needs in order to strengthen. When every time the immune system fights off an illness and fights off a disease, it becomes stronger, and then it is more able to respond in the future to similar types of illnesses.
Right.
And so this is why we have epidemics of cancers, in addition to the fact that we're injecting so many toxins and disease fragments and foreign DNA into our children's bodies. that's triggering autoimmune disease, allergies, asthma, childhood cancers, and it's criminal what we as a society and those who are in charge in the society have done to our children.
Absolutely. It's cruel.
Iatrogenic illness. It is iatrogenic illness, and it is caused by vaccines.
Absolutely. It's cruel and unusual punishment. Do not fear disease, and vaccination is not immunization.
No.
Very basic. Vaccination, if anything, is auto-immunization, because the immune system is indeed the infectious disease immune system is located in the gut, respiratory tract, eyes, nose, throat, some on your skin. It's where Mother Nature over the eons has expected every human to be introduced to pathogens. You're going to be inhaled or ingested. They're not going to be put into the muscles of your arm and bypass the immune system. The immune reaction is not just antibodies. That's what they use to judge efficacy of vaccination is antibodies. There are millions of people who are immune, which means low susceptibility to specific infections, who are immune without any antibody production whatsoever, that after their exposure to the particular potentially infectious agent, their immune system reacted on the other level, on the cellular level, and that was enough to give them the immunity they needed. The antibody is not indicative necessarily at all of immunity. And by bypassing the immune system, it induces, it triggers a bastardized reaction. It is not a full immune reaction because it's not being inhaled or ingested or on your skin. And you end up with chronic diseases such as Marcy was mentioning, chronic illnesses and autoimmune disorders, asthma, lupus in some cases. I mean, they are potentially catastrophic. Okay, Marcy, we're coming down to the end. That just said that we got 30 seconds. Marcy,
I was just going to say, there's a really great video on the Vax Truth website called "We Need to Talk."
Okay.
And that video goes through exactly what you were just talking about, Shawn.
Definitely. VaxTruth.org and the vaccine myth and issue of trust. Okay. This is the Alex Jones Show. Sure appreciate the opportunity, Alex. Y'all take care.
Thank you.